Tell me that the ECOWAS was established for the African benefit. Tell me that the AU was established for the African benefit. They're being funded by the West. And until Africa can understand that Africa problems cannot be solved by Western funding, it has to be solved by Africa funding and the resources that are under our soil, we're going to find ourselves in this problem. And we find ourselves in this problem because of bad leadership, that we need them to really vacate so we can take over as the next generation of leaders, because they're not serious and they're cowards. This cowardice cannot continue.
You'd be willing to relocate, not to visit.
Of course, 1,000%. Look, I wasn't brought here because I came for economic migration. I was maybe 2 when the Civil War came upon us. I was uprooted from a middle-class family. My grandfather, look, I have lineage up to King Salboso Kamara, the first king of that region, the first king of the Green Coast. I have royalty in my blood. Do you think I want to come here and do a 9 to 5? Are you kidding me? Had the West not brought upon us a regime change, a coup, I would not be here. Most Africans in the diaspora today would not be here. So let's be very matter of fact.
Hello, my people. Welcome to this week's Breakdown Panel, where we dig deeper into the hottest stories shaping our world right now. Today, I'm joined by a dynamic panel yet again. Milen King, who is a political and social commentator. Sarpei, Ntreh, a researcher of African geopolitics. And Fanta, Kamara, a global affairs analyst. Panelists, welcome to the show. How are you doing?
Doing great, Sandra.
Let's start with Beijing, right? This week was a big week for Beijing because what happened at the military parade has dominated headlines across the globe. Now, okay, so to give this some context, China just staged one of its biggest military parades in years, right? And it showcased new weapons and new alliances. But here's the question that we're asking. Was this simply about military pride, or was this something bigger? Was it a signal to the world that a new global power order is in motion? Let's start with me. What did you think?
Hi, Sandra. Thanks. So, yeah, I guess for China, this is a multi-pronged event, because in one vein, they are actually trying to project might. And in another vein, they may also be looking to constitute the sort of basis for the world that they would like to usher in. We know that it's no secret that the Chinese Communist Party has been looking for what they refer to as a multipolar order. Russia, Moscow has also said that it's looking for a multipolar order. A multipolar order is one in which, in academia, it's said a multipolar order is where there are more than 2 superpowers. But then there's rarely ever 2 superpowers in any sort of jurisdiction or in any sort of situation. What a multipolar world means right now is a world where even if there were a superpower, it cannot determine the sort of outcomes that it would like. Think about this. In 1950, for instance, the United States accounted for about 50% of global GDP. So everything produced in the world in 1950, half of it was produced in the United States. Now, can anyone guess? It's under 25%. So the US accounts for less than a quarter of global GDP, which means that someone would have taken up that space. Other countries would have taken up that space. And we've seen, especially since the end of the Cold War in 1990, that there have been the rise of what is called the regional powers, right? So Brazil rising quite dramatically in Latin America, India rising in Asia, China also. And even in the Gulf region, were it not for a few things, you would have mentioned Iran as one of the rising regional powers. In Africa, not to be left out, South Africa has actually gained a lot of prominence in the last 20 or so years. So these regional powers are actually making sure that the sphere of influence that Washington used to have is diminishing. And that is a world that Moscow and Beijing actually would want. So for Beijing, this is a show of might. They are basically just sort of telling the world that they have arrived. And we saw the artillery on display. We saw the state of the art armaments that they are sure that Western capitals would have picked up. And so that's important for Beijing. They were also marking the 80th anniversary of the end of World War II.
Correct.
And something that actually sort of hit me during the proceedings was Xi Jinping insisting that the story of World War II should be told better. And indeed, I am no fan of the Chinese Communist Party, but it would surprise you to know that even though I'm literally in the field, it would take up till the last year of my undergraduate studies to realize that Russia or the USSR put more bodies on the line in World War II than any other country. So more Russians died in World War II trying to defend Europe and obviously the USSR than any other country. But you are rarely told that if you grew up where I grew up in Africa, if you school where I school in the UK. So that also is a thing. I'm sure there's an African connection to that particular story. And when we dig in further, I will raise that issue up as well.
That's interesting. So my question to you all is, if a new global order, right, where a new global power is in motion here, what does this mean for Africa and the global Black world? Fanta?
Yeah, I think that's the terminology. That's an easy term, like to sort of slap on it, right? I think the world is waking up. I applaud the fraternal relationship, the heartwarming brotherly love, right, between these countries, or at least they have shown and continue to show. And I think the world is taking notice, and we should applaud it. They are focusing on creating their or strengthening their sovereignty, right, and becoming more and more independent of the Western world and the Western reliance. And I think Africa should do the same. It's not about replacing Western hegemony, right? It's about understanding that you need to focus on those critical components that will allow you a seat at the table on the world stage, and not put you in a position where you have to constantly be a beggar, right? So looking inwards and strengthening, right, your security forces, your military might, your infrastructure, so that you are considered a serious player on the world stage, is exactly what needs to happen for Africa. So I absolutely applaud, this union between China, between Russia and North Korea and all of the Asian countries, and what have you. But I think Africa needs to pay attention and not look to China or any of these countries as, the new leader, right, of the world, but more so of how much they need to take seriously, right? The time for play is over. The time for jokiness is over. The time for being a voluntary slave is over. It's time for Africa to wake up and start taking itself seriously.
Yeah, and the question that pops to in my mind is, when is Africa going to show off its own military to the world, right? When are we going to do that? So, Milen, I want to hear your thoughts and your perspective on what happened as well, and what it means for Africa.
So I'll start with this. As my colleagues were talking, a word came up to me, and it's performative. And I'm going to say performative because you have three of the biggest characters in, if you want to call it democracy, right? Korea, Japan, and Russia. Outside of these guys being, I guess you could say, stand-up political figures, they're also all showsmen. How much did we hear about Kim Jong-il's bulletproof train making it to
right?
How much did we hear about Putin's top of the line security forces connecting with Ping's security forces. It's performative. That's what I got with these guys in the beginning. Mm-hmm. And it's because of, unfortunately, thank you to our president over here, who will never be outdone. He is the ultimate showsman. So I respect the fact that they want to acknowledge the story of World War II. I do respect that. But I feel for these guys a symbolic alignment in a more quiet capacity, for me, would have been like, okay, these guys mean business. You had Putin was just in America less than 3 weeks ago, right, talking to so when I say I watch the performative aspect of these guys, I think there could be something there realistically, because I do think America can't withstand if other countries really unite and say this is what we're doing. America can't withstand.
Performance is important though, right? Because that's what America pays attention to. That's what the world pays attention to.
And now the problem is we have a performative president. And that's where I think the problem comes in. Because you look at India. India, of that group, they showed up nice and quietly, but they are getting demolished right now with the tariffs. And they're in a weird space. And I think this is the problem with these other countries. I don't think match our president to show out, because he is reactionary. And as far as it goes with Africa being a part of this, I don't want to sit here and lie like I understand the diaspora to like, this is the greatest army, this is the best army. But who could we look at in a 54, and we're listen to this, 54. The US has 50 of them. So we've got 4 more. Who could we put at the forefront to say is our biggest and our best for military? Who could we put at the forefront to say this is our biggest and best for our financials? That is a power struggle that Africa has at this moment, because we're portrayed in the media to look like we're always the recipients. You know, we're always begging.
Begging.
But I don't think that has to be the picture of us, is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
So, I think it's unfortunate, because when you look at China, right, Fanta, with us being Liberians, how much is it scary that China in the next 15 to 20 years could almost take over Liberia? Because of everything.
Oh, yeah.
It's not scary at all.
Yeah.
I welcome partnerships that are mutually beneficial. I think that is the mistake that African leaders have made. They often get into these negotiations and negotiate from a place of weakness, right? They're subjugated to these Western powers, right? And they don't understand that aid has become a form, or aid is a form of colonialism.
Yeah.
So to sit there and not understand that you have gold. Let's take Liberia. Thank you for mentioning that. Let's take Liberia, like, for example.
Yeah.
Firestone, largest rubber plantation, is in Liberia. Yes. In the entire world, the Firestone tire that and Liberia is one of the smallest country in the world. We have barely 5 million people in terms of population. Very, 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 very small. So Liberia produces rubber. Liberia produces iron ore. Liberia produces gold. Liberia produces diamond. Liberia produces tin. The list goes on. Timber. Look at Sierra Leone, right? Diamond, gold, Ghana, Nigeria, Angola, South Africa, Rwanda. The list goes on. The fact that we constantly, our leaders constantly sit, right, in these seats because they're told to sit, and they refer to their negotiation partners as sir, ma'am, yes, sir, right, puts you automatically at a disadvantage.
Yeah.
That is not the reality of most African countries and their leaders. The leaders need to understand that they need to start operating from a place of power, and not from a place of slave mentality, which is Africa's biggest problem. So I welcome partners who will engage in mutually beneficial agreements for our countries. I welcome that. And China, Russia, whatever it is, come to the table as a beneficial partner.
And you see everything, that energy that you just stated, that's what I'm saying for us when we go to these tables, because you hit the nail on the head multiple times, is that we never come in from, we have the actual resources that you need. Firestone is the second biggest tire company in the world. In the world, not just in a part. That comes from Liberia, right? And many don't know that. We have one of the worst deals. And this isn't the podcast episode for this, but we've got one of the worst deals.
Yeah, so I just wanted to stick with the point of military might and what the conference in China sought to achieve. For me, the most important thing as an African is to realize the unfolding global trend and plan accordingly. I have said many times on this platform and on others that the only way we can forge forward is to look at South-South solidarity. And one of the ways South-South solidarity expresses itself is through the AFCFTA, the African Continental Free Trade Area, and through the AU as well. I'm not interested in African governments showing military might. I'm actually interested in African governments mending their homes. I'm interested in African governments building states that can withstand all that pressure that comes from our economic and political relationships with the rest of the world. The China, Russia, India sort of triumvirate, I don't know how far it's going to stand, especially because one would imagine that the last time this particular summit was held, Narendra Modi, Prime Minister of India, wasn't there. One would ask, why is he there today? He's there because of something Milen mentioned. He wants to show the West, and he wants to show America in particular that, we've got other friends. And that is what we mean by a multipolar world, a world where the so-called superpower or superpowers cannot determine outcomes as much as they did before. After the collapse of, the USSR in 1990, we knew that liberal hegemony, that the sort of global political order that was sewn together in Washington, famously referred to as a Washington Consensus, was what a lot of countries were, the path that most countries in the global south walked upon. But then in the last 10 or so years, with a lot of options, available, you realize that most countries, yes, would feel compelled to sort of find very, very good relationships with the West. But then because there are other options as well, look at the two people who were at the summit, two African presidents who were at the summit. It was Denis Osaso Nguema and then Morgan Chirangorai, the Zimbabwean leader, name always escapes me. But so this was the Emerson Mnangagwa. So these two were the ones who were there. And if you look at these two, they do not actually have a very good relationship with Western countries.
Right.
But then their participation in the summit is supposed to project a sort of, we've got friends on the other side.
But does it really? Because I was going to ask about that, China and Africa are supposed to be very, very close friends. And here they are hosting their biggest parade of the decade, and only 2 African countries show up, right? Yeah. And you don't have any of our big players there, South Africa, Ghana, Nigeria, none of them go. So, what does this tell us? Is it Africa's decision to, sit this one out because of the optics? Or is China deliberately choosing to sideline, we don't know if they were invited, and didn't attend, or what the case is, but what do you guys think about the fact that only 2 African leaders were present at this parade?
Let me just get this through. Yesterday in Algeria, the 4th intra-African trade fair started, and I would actually be expecting that maybe in our next conversation we talk about that. So Fanta was saying last week that we do not really trade among ourselves. Well, the intra-African free trade, intra-African trade fair goes on every year. Barely a media house covers it, a global media house covers it, but it happens. And about $44 billion in terms of deals are thought to be going to be concluded by the end of that.
Yeah, that's good.
I'm not sure, coming to what you said, I'm not sure.
We needed to increase that, right? Like we needed to focus, right? Give a
Yeah, we do, but I would have wished we talked about, I think the point I'm trying to make is that I wished we talked about that rather than African countries not showing up at a summit where China was actually not talking to us, was talking to Europeans and Americans. They weren't talking to us.
Yeah, and
that's
I think
what
that's
happened
important.
there. They weren't talking to us.
Very important, though, right?
We're talking to Europeans, and
I think that's the key point that I want to focus on is we see many Africans today see China as the savior. Let's be honest. When I was in Ghana the other day and I did my town hall with the students at University of Legon, they were like, China and Russia, they care for Africa. They have our best interest at heart. They're going to, quote unquote, save us. And if that's true, right? What is happening? What happened last week? What does it tell us about how China views the continent? Because I think it says a lot.
Yeah,
I'm not sure.
I think it's interesting, right? Because we don't know for sure if they were invited and did not show up, or if they were not invited. The fact that you have two leaders show up, so there's still a lot of ambiguity around that. I think it was really important. I know most of them sent, right, representatives in some way, shape, or form. What does that say about the actual head of states not being there? I think there's a lot of questions, right, that will probably go unanswered because we don't know for sure what the invitation was really like. And for me to say that, yes, I at some point this was a show of force, right, to Milen's point, a bit performative to show the U.S. and European powers that, look, we have friends and we as neighbors, right, can trade with each other and optimize, right, our economic strength, our military might, right, our relationships with each other. I think it was important for Africa to also be there. So not understanding if they were invited and just didn't show up, or if they were not invited, is a question that just might linger, right? But look, it was important for them to be there. I think if you consider someone your friend and whatever they are doing, you have to show up and you have to support. If you don't do that, it means so let's just play this out. If Africa was invited, right, the heads of states, and did not show up, it would be because it was out of fear, once again, for the European and Western powers. If that is the case, then we go back to this notion of African leaders are slaves, right? Yeah. African leaders are voluntary slaves. And the fact that they don't understand that, the impact that has on their economies, the impact that has on their people, it is massive, because 80% of your continent, the leaders do not represent 80% of the continent, right? 80% of the population, which are you, do not see themselves or their values reflected in the leadership. And I keep saying this. If we do not exercise our voices right now, and we continue to push this off, this level of cowardice, right, has to die. It has to die. The African leaders are cowards. They need to step up, or they need to step off.
But they need to be there.
This is the time to make it.
Yes, I think they need to be there. I feel like when you're doing business with
someone, not sure about that.
Well, I feel when you're doing business with someone, I think representation is highly important. Look, we're talking, these guys they're getting resources to help make their country stronger from us. An invitation, which we may never know, right? We may never know if one went out, but I think forefronting, since this was about partnerships, is that not a partnership from these African countries? Because to only have two, there are 54 countries in Africa. To only have two, that's less than 1%, brother. So you have to. I would even feel better if there were like 7 or 8 countries there. Then I'd be like, okay.
Now, by the way, the last parade in 2000 and 10 years ago, so that would be 2015. About 9 or 8 African leaders showed up, by the way.
And that is a level of representation. You see, Russia, right? We don't have the African diaspora does not have the luxury that these countries have. Like Russia is an entity. Russia is like the equivalent if you say Columbia University. It's like you could say Russia and you know what all it represents. When it comes to Africa, there's the uniqueness between all of us here on this panel and the rest of the country, that having a leader from Ghana makes a difference. Having a leader from Nigeria makes a difference. Having a leader from Zimbabwe makes a difference. And that is what I feel you need. That needs to be seen.
I think there's go for it.
So quick one. Two reasons why I don't think they need to be there. First of all, I think it's better that African countries continue to at least pursue this idea of non-alignment. Non-alignment is the idea that we belong neither to the east nor west. We look forward, and that is quoting none other than Kwame Nkrumah. The point remains that global powers, or the powers that exist to shape our lives, would always try to contest among themselves. The most important thing for us as Africans is to look towards our home, is to look towards building infrastructure, is to look towards making
I don't
lives
mean to
better.
cut you off, and that's true, but we do need partners in the process, right?
We do need partners.
For me, when you say that we don't need to align, but China is Africa's biggest trading partner right now, right? And you have 7 leaders, African leaders, who went to the White House to meet with Trump. When he called on them, they showed up. I mean, there's alignment happening, right? So for me, I'm confused. I'm confused as to what the continent actually wants. And here we are at a time where it has an opportunity to strategically position itself. There is a global shift happening in the world right now. And every country is claiming their seat at the table. Where is Africa's seat? What seat is Africa claiming?
Africa's seat is in Africa.
We conflict non-alignment with neutrality, right?
Right.
Neutrality, we can respect. Non-alignment makes no sense at all. Let's not even try to intellectualize it, right? It makes no sense. Neutrality, yes, right? Maintain your sovereignty is understandable. But to say you're friends with someone, you have a strategic partnership, a trade partnership, right? And then you don't show up at one of their most commemorative moments, it says that you're a coward. It says that you don't understand, first of all, once again, where your power lies. And so
should the relationship necessarily express itself in military terms?
You have chosen to stay out, right? And not show up, not because of your sovereignty, not because you say, look, I am Nigeria, head of state. I choose to stay home because I want to maintain, I want to maintain neutrality. Instead, you're not showing up because you don't want to piss off the West. Yep. And once again, you are a slave. You are a coward. African leaders are cowards. They need to step up or really move aside and allow this generation to take over the leadership of Africa and lead Africa and transform Africa into the continent that we can all be proud of. Look, no matter what passports we hold, no matter what other passports we hold, Africa is our home. We will have no other home but our continent. And the fact that we feel we can enjoy these luxurious lives in other people's lands and not ours, when we can recreate that same thing for ourselves and with other Black partners like the Caribbeans, makes no sense. It makes no sense at all. So there's no excuse for that. Neutrality, I respect. Non-alignment is BS. Let's find something else.
Yeah, and I also think, you're basing it, you're saying about it being military. But if you look at this from my context, I didn't really gauge that it was military. It was just, hey, the good old boys network and we're all connecting. Yes, the military thing did play a part, but it wasn't so much about that. It was like, hey, look at these leaders. They're all getting together. And I do, like I said, it's the part that Africa is a big contributor to China. And to only have 2 there, to me, that is a slap in the face. I hope an invite went out, but if an invite didn't go out, and to Fanta's point, if guys are just scared to show up.
Yeah, I think either way, either side of the coin is very telling about the relationship, about how Africa sees themselves, right? And their ability to just think on their own and decide what they want to do on their own.
What if thinking on their own actually shows itself in getting out of China, Sino-Western, mess, what if thinking for Africa or thinking on our own means that we need to sit this one out?
Then don't show up like when Trump calls. Don't show up like when the EU calls. Don't show up like when the US calls. So do the same thing. Remain neutral. That is neutrality, right? Do not align with one party, and then when the other party calls, you object. It makes it look. We have to speak simply, right? Like we have to really start reducing our analysis, our feedback, right? Our explanation of these things to the most simple level so everyday people can understand, right? We should not confuse the people. If you're friends with someone, if you trade with someone, you do not only have like a friendship, you have an economic relationship with this person. There is an economic responsibility to show up. If you're going to remain completely neutral and say, look, I'd rather just focus on Africa, that's great. We applaud that, right? We applaud that. But do not show up like when the EU calls you. Do not show up like when the US calls, right? Do not show up when China calls. Maintain your relationship in the background. That's respectable. But when you start picking sides, it makes no sense. You're confusing the people and you don't know what you want.
I fully agree with you on that one because it is a lot of tap dancing. You don't need, and that's what I feel about it. It's a lot of tap dancing. So I get it. You don't want to be there? Well, then don't be anywhere.
Well, global diplomacy is a lot of tap dancing. And to your point,
but then you're saying they shouldn't have showed up to China.
No, I think the point I'm trying to make is that China was trying to achieve one particular thing with this, and what they were trying to achieve is that they were trying to at least signal to the West, or particularly to the United States, that the time for a multipolar world has been ushered in, right? The multipolar world has been ushered in. And that is an argument or a conversation I am not interested in participating. I, as an African, I'm not interested in participating in. And if I were interested in participating in, I would actually want to understand what non-alignment means in a multipolar world. Interestingly, one of the people who has contributed to understanding non-alignment intellectually in these last few years is the Indian Foreign Minister, Jahan Shankar. And he was actually saying non-alignment means strategic autonomy. You have autonomy and you are strategic about it. So today, these people are your friends. Tomorrow, they may not be your very good friends. Tomorrow, these other people are your friends. The next day, they may not be your very good friends. You are strategic in how you express your sovereignty and your autonomy. And that, for me, is the most important thing. We do not need to run to the next, new superpower because we are tired with the old ones. And so we express our non-alignment, or we express our autonomy strategically. We express our autonomy. Sometimes it actually would mean that we even support Western positions. Even non-alignment sometimes means that you don't support Western positions because, again, you're expressing your autonomy strategically and not just replacing one superpower with the other.
I think sometimes in order to show your value, you need to show that you have options, right? And I just want us to look at this picture. If 10, 15 countries, African countries, had showed up at this parade, what message does that send to Washington, to Trump? We know how Trump is and how he thinks, right? So if 15 African nations showed up at this parade, just imagine. I think that would have sent us a message, don't you think?
No, I'm not sure. No. You'd have to.
It would have. Look, like
it would depend on which countries, for instance. If your annual budget is still being coordinated. By donor support from the West, you are not about to show up in Beijing.
Well, first of all, donor support has been pulled, so therefore it is more reason.
It's not just about the United States. It's not just about the United States. The friends of the United States would also be interested in looking at how you are playing on the global stage.
The United States doesn't have any friends right now. Sorry, news flash, breaking news.
They do have friends. I can tell you,
Canada is not their friend. The UK is not their friend, right? They are.
I can tell you on authority. I can tell you on authority that there are people in Brussels at the EU headquarters who are actually looking at the current movement as a fad, right? It's a phase. When Mr. Trump when Mr. Trump gets out of power, relations will be, or normal service will be resumed. That's the calculation of some
No, it
diplomats.
would not.
And so,
No, it would not.
whatever you do, no, it would, and
I don't
whatever
agree
you
with
do right now,
if the country
as an
stays
African country,
no, what I'm saying is, if the West stays Republican, it won't be business as normal. And you know, to that point that you just brought up, when Trump gets out, if this country stays Republican, and he's setting things up to where it's a plug and play, and that's the route he's going. And so, to the point, and I do hear what you're saying, Nee, but what I strongly believe is, for Africa, we need to flex our muscle on the world stage. Like I said,
what muscles exactly? What muscles? I'm very interested. What muscles? What muscles exactly? Sorry, and I say that all the time. I do not want to be. I do not want to fall into the trap. I don't want to fall into the trap of African nationalism.
The muscle.
What military? What military? What military exactly?
And this is what I'm saying to you. We have 54 countries, and I posed the question earlier, right, Nick? What if you, as an African, as all of us, who could we say is our most demonstrative military force that we could present? We don't have presentation or representation on a world scale other than slave mentality.
Milen, it doesn't. Milen, the fact that we are not interested, or at least incapable of showing or demonstrating what China did, doesn't mean we are slaves or dedicated to slave mentality. It actually means that our path to self-sustenance may lie somewhere else, other than trying to show some perceived enemy that we could bomb them at will. But that's the point.
That's not about enemies. It's not about that. It's about representation and presentation. If I'm contributing,
what representation in showmanship? You need a representative in the circle, whatever that's about showmanship. You need a representative there.
This is why you're mentioning ECOWAS, right? Is ECOWAS not representation or presentation?
But ECOWAS is an economic community. It's an economic community of West African states.
But I'm saying it is representation, correct? It's presentation.
No, it's integration.
Not just an economic community, ECOWAS.
It's right? Integration.
Military community.
ECOWAS is integration. It's not necessarily representation. It's integration.
When you integrate something, that's not a representation of what you intend on putting out. Look,
no,
you see,
when you integrate for the benefit of member bodies, and not necessarily to project power.
Okay, guys. So let's wrap up here. Let's move on, because
yeah. Can I just say this?
Go for it.
And can I just really say this? Look, we have to say, whether we look at the alliance, the growing alliance between the Asian states, the alliance between, Russia, North Korea, India, the BRIC countries, and beyond. Whether we look at that as a new world order, or we look at that to be a pushback of Western domination, right, an assertion, or an increase towards a more multipolar world. I think one thing we have to remember is that we have to reject Western hegemony. For too long, they have dominated our politics, our culture, our economies, right? Which has frankly led to the widespread and adoption of the Western ideology, the Western notions, right? We have come to identify ourselves with everything Western because that's all that has been pushed upon us. That's all we know from growing up. The TV shows that you watch, it shapes your culture. The classes you take in high school, right? The history lessons that are taught are very much from a Western perspective. And I think it's really important in this day and age to realize that all of that was not for our benefit. It was to push a certain narrative. We have to welcome a more multipolar world, a world where no one feels that that there's a singular world power, but that each and every country should maintain their sovereignty and truly work together and collaborate where they can support each other's agenda, right? And it not being where a show of who has the bigger shoulder or who has the bigger muscles. That's where we need to be. And I think until we can get to a more united Africa, like a more united, as Nee often say, like South and South. Well, our progress will always be stunted. But it doesn't mean that we cannot continue to work towards that unity, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, as I mentioned, like the last time, Burkina Faso is doing this, Niger is doing this, Mali is doing this, so many other countries. Until we can get to that united front, we cannot relent, we cannot relax. We have to understand that progress doesn't wait and it has to continue. We have to be intentional each and every day. So it is extremely important. Yeah.
And speaking of Burkina Faso, right? Let's turn to a big story from last month, which was our President Ibrahim Traoré. He made headlines by announcing that he is expelling the UN's top official in Burkina Faso. Why? Because of a report that she did that accuses state-aligned forces for abusing children. So essentially accusing his government, Ibrahim Traoré's government, for abusing children. So on one side, critics are saying that Traoré is silencing dissent, right? And shutting the door on accountability, which is a serious red flag, right? And on the other side, you have supporters who are saying that he's making a bold stand for sovereignty and rejecting outside interference. So I want to open that up, and let's start with Milen. Where do you land on this?
Where I land on this is I'm a big fan of Ibrahim, first and foremost. But the thing is, Africa has had a weird history with this. And I feel like it's one of those tough things to gauge. Hopefully he's doing this because he probably viewed it like, look, you're making this a bigger situation than it is, and I don't think you're adding to it. I would. That's what I'm hoping, because I don't want to speak like I'm not biased towards him. I'm a big fan of what he's doing, but Africa does have a known history of this.
When you say history of this, what do you mean specifically?
A known history of having child abuse issues.
Okay.
The continent has been known of this, and I feel now that information is able to reach to anyone at any given time, that's the low-hanging fruit is, oh, well, look at in this war, that's what these people did. Look at this time in Africa, this is what happened.
So this is a red flag for you.
Sounds like a red flag. I don't know. What's the color between red and green? Is it yellow?
Orange, maybe. Okay.
I like this guy. He's young, and I think I think Africa needs a bunch of young leaders who are ready to carry this load. But I hate that he's here. So I'm at the yellow right now.
Yeah. Okay. Fanta, what about you?
You already you already know where I stand. The UN is no authority on human rights issues. The UN is a sad excuse for a united, what is to be, a United Nation organization. The UN is a propaganda organization. The UN is part of the problem. It's a big part of the many African problems, right, that we have and see today. The UN allegedly, has been directly involved with siphoning arms, right, to war-torn parts of Africa and supporting like the rebels. We know that a lot of NGOs, the way how these rebels, right, gets their ammunition is through them. So the United Nations record on human rights, or being the authority to condemn one of human rights, it's very, very flawed, right? If they have any type of power, what's happening in Palestine today would never happen, right? What's happening in the United States today will never happen. We're in a state of perversion where you have the elites, the so-called elites, which they should really be referred to as the depraved, preying on children, right, and go scot-free, right? They do not see any type of ramifications, or at least the level of ramifications that should be applied never gets applied to them, because you know what, the laws doesn't apply to the elites. The law doesn't apply to, quote unquote, those at the top. They only are good for, like, the UN is only good for meetings and writing really crazy reports to continue to depict Africa as this poor continent, the African people as not civilized people, right? People who don't understand their culture, people who don't understand how to deal with their own issues. It is ridiculous, and we need to reject it. It needs to stop. Look, where there are abuses, it should be called out, it should be addressed. But the UN is definitely not that body. The UN is flawed. The UN has done nothing for Africa compared to what they have contributed to the degradation, right, of Africa and African nations, the African economies. Like the UN needs to go to sleep. They need to be kicked out. They need to be kicked out, and they really need to go and draft a report about the human rights abuses here in the United States and other parts of the world that is not Africa, right? Let's just make that very clear. Where there are abuses, let's address it. But the UN being the authority, really?
Okay, Nee, where do you land on this, Nee?
I take all the criticisms about the UN in good faith, as if I am a rep. I'm a UN rep on this panel, but I do have a sort of professional affinity with the UN. But the point I'm trying to make is that
full disclosure, full disclosure, please.
Yeah, I guess. But the point I'm trying to make is that I take all of the the reservations in good faith, because they are not just reservations of one person on this panel. A lot of people across the global south and even in the global north have huge reservations about the UN, whether it borders on its capacity to actually affect matters on the ground and what it can do when there is one superpower, one country that contributes, I think, about for every $5 that goes into the UN, the United States contributes $1. So that's like 20%. I don't know where it stands right now. I don't know what the ratio is right now. But obviously, with such a financial architecture or financial structure, it means that the United States would affect a lot of things within the UN. And so I take that the UN is a 20th century, is a mid-20th century institution that should be fashioned for 21st century problems. And so that in itself is a thing worth noting. However, there is also no replacement for global governance. When I say there's no replacement for global governance, we still need to find a way to cooperate with each other on a global level. And that cooperation must be done through mechanisms and regimes instituted globally. And the UN is the only institution capable at this moment to facilitate that sort of cooperation. And so, having said that, I'd actually still would like to keep the body that is, in the absence of any other institution, that is actually trying to find, grounds for all human beings to coexist peacefully. With regards to sorry, Sandra, with regards to what happened in Burkina Faso, I would actually defer to what Milen said. African states have issues, and when African states usually accuse the UN of bias or biases, it requires patience. I mean, any sort of digestion of the issue requires patience, and so I'd rather be patient and digest the matter be patient, and look at the facts of the matter rather than siding with either Captain Traoré or the UN.
Where is the UN human rights report on child trafficking in the Western world? Where is that?
Well, and to your point, one of the biggest criticisms of the UN is the fact that it has not given Africa a permanent seat on the Security Council, even though the continent makes up over a quarter of its member states, right? So people are saying that, how can the UN expect Africans to respect its authority when it doesn't respect Africa with a real seat, a real voice at the table?
Can I ask what's the point of the UN's permanent 5 is, the Security Council? What's the point?
Well, they make
what does anyone feel?
I mean, it's they make the Security Council is pretty much responsible for decisions, global decisions.
If there's a committee of equal states, as is claimed, I don't believe how all states are equal, but if there's a committee of equal states, why should we have a permanent 5 with the power of veto? Why should we have that? Can anyone convince me as to why there should be a Security Council with a power?
Right? It's about understanding that these entities that were established to sort of maintain world order, right, good governance, have instead been leveraged as propaganda tool, right? Have instead been leveraged by one or two leaders, right, to push agendas.
Fanta, how did they do that?
No, let me tell you, right? So the UN, the United Nations is supposed to be a body that's supposed to hold countries, part of their responsibilities, right? Hold countries responsible for when they err in economics, human rights, and what have you. Look at what's happening today and has been happening with Africa for a very long time. The UN tends to exert selective authority, selective humanitarianism, selective justice, only where it appeases members who have veto power, right? Then the UN is assertive. The UN drafts tons and tons of reports on Africa, African presidents, right? That the US and other Western countries take and leverage them for sanctions, right, on these very nations. When you really look into it, it was really driven by one goal only: to maintain power over those countries and thereby pushing those propaganda through the UN and essentially justifying things like sanctions or coups, regime changes. The UN is always a part of those reports. In fact, they're among the first organizations who draft those reports to state any type of human rights issues, human rights abuses, injustices happening in those countries. And then the United States acts upon them with sanctions, with regime changes, with coups, further depriving the people of those countries, the people of those nations, and those very nations, their economic sovereignty, economic growth, right? Stifling any type of development and any type of infrastructure development for those countries and their people. The UN is right smack in the middle of that. Their power only extends, right, or they like to play power only with Africa and developing nations, right? Not with the US, because to the point that you just made, because the US, funds a big part of the UN budget. They have veto power. So they use the UN as a propaganda tool. You can't tell me otherwise.
So, Nia, are you suggesting that you don't think that Africa needs to have a seat on the UN Security Council?
I think the UN needs to be revamped. The
permanent seat. Yeah.
Yeah, no, they should, right? If you're going to be a body that represents the world, every leader should have a seat.
I want to hear what does Nia agree with that? Because it sounds like he doesn't. I just want to be clear on where he stands on that.
I would like to reconfigure the UN for 21st century problems, which includes the fact that I do not want to see any one member or 5 members or even 7 have veto power.
Got it. Okay. So
I don't see the point of a veto power.
You're saying there's no
dismantle
need
for,
but
dismantle
the reality is it's here. The council. There are 5 members right now. That's the reality. So should Africa continue to fight for a seat at that table, or you don't think it's necessary?
I am failing to realize the correlation between Africa's permanent seat on the Security Council and how that augurs well for African non-alignment and African integration. I'm failing to see that.
I think we can agree
I don't see
that
it.
the UN doesn't work. Sorry.
Yeah.
No, the UN needs to be reconfigured for the 20th century.
Hosting a report on a country without representation. And I think there may be a disconnect, because to me, it's tough for me to have someone speak on my behalf if I don't have a representative. You know, and I think that goes back to what we were just saying earlier. And so with the UN having that level of power, you know, I never viewed it as propaganda, but as Fanta's talking, I'm kind of like, dang, well, that is kind of true, because you go right to the other side in Europe, right? Where's one of the biggest child trafficking rings happening at? Oh, that is so swept up. Why do I know more about what happens in Africa via the UN versus what do I know about what happens in child trafficking in Europe? Why do I know more about that? Well, it's because that's what's deciding to be ushered and pushed out. And
I don't think the UN is in charge of the media you listen to.
Oh, come on, me.
No, I'm not. I don't think the UN is in charge of the media you choose to listen to.
They're not in charge.
Honestly.
But they're not. But what they are in charge of is what they put out. And what I'm saying is, if you decide to make one side more populist than the other, that is a propaganda approach, man.
Yes.
And
you know what? I can actually
understand from Burkina Faso's perspective. This is a country that's leading a revolution at home.
Yes.
Okay. They have citizens who are building roads and, you know, for free because they love their president, because they want to be part of change. And so when a report like this comes out, it's about narrative control. For them, it defeats the work that they're doing. It derails all the progress that they're making. That's their perspective, is we can't have these sort of reports coming out when we're trying to move our country forward. And the one thing to consider also, right, is the fact that they were not giving and I don't really want to say advantage, but for me, a more diplomatic approach would have been, hey, we have this report. We want you to take a look at it. What do you have to say about this before we go public with it? And you see there should be some sort of, you know, collaboration to really determine the facts, because what they're saying is not based on facts. They did not
tell me what's happening, like in my house.
They did not consult us. They have no idea what's happening on the ground. They just put this report out there without any consultation from the government. And
it's
so
disparaging. It's to disparage. It's to delegitimize.
Made me scared. Was like, oh goodness, we're talking about child abuse. What's one of the biggest things for anyone to overcome when it's connected to them in a public standpoint is that. So this is where the yellow flag for me comes in. It's like, man, I just wish he would have kept her there and been like, oh, so you put out a false report. Please go and rectify that. Now, it creates a
But they would never do that. And
it's too late. The damage is already done. It's so much harder to, you know, when it's already out there.
And to the point Sandra brought up, it's an in-house discussion. Hey, we found this report. You don't go front street with it. Because
and the reason why I'm saying this is because you literally see what this leader is doing, and you see it. So if you're for the progress and that they're making, and you want to support their efforts, for me, I just think that would have been the better approach. Give them 2 weeks, or just give them something to say, hey, we gave you a month to work with us to figure out what is going on.
Sandra,
before we put out the report.
I can tell you for a fact that UN reports on nations never come out prior to that. I mean, no country is caught unawares by UN reports about state of affairs in that country, because the UN representatives in that country communicate within that country whatever the UN is collating and putting out. So no country is caught unawares.
Remove the UN from having an agenda.
No country,
right? They have an agenda.
I can go as far as to agree with you guys that the sort of body that was set up in the aftermath of World War II, the UN that was set up in the aftermath of World War II, was actually or has been utilized to the extent that they are expanding Western hegemony. I can actually agree with you on that.
But that's the truth. There's nothing else.
But the point, then I do not also subscribe to the fact that platforms for global governance should be thrown away because they were established by Westerners.
Nobody is saying that. Now you're taking the conversation to an absolutely different spectrum. The UN's agenda is to drive Western hegemony.
What is the?
That is the UN's
I'm still yet to
agenda.
I'm still yet. That's the point. I'm still not convinced that the UN has set out an agenda to sort of what deplete.
Say, hey, we're here, even though we're 100 plus nation, right?
What is the agenda? Is the agenda to deplete?
Is the agenda like the Western nations?
Would the agenda be to deplete African states of their resources?
Absolutely,
would the agenda be?
It is part of that. Like the UN's work with the World Bank and the IMF, right? Look, like I know the third topic on this list, right, was the looting of Africa's resources, and one of them, like Africa's artifacts, right? Where has the UN been in ensuring that reparative justice is actually done to
UNESCO actually has been calling for artifacts to be returned. Different UNESCO leaders have been calling for artifacts.
Since when?
Since I've been following this issue.
No, but when Africans started advocating for their artifacts to be returned, right? That's where that conversation came from. That's where the advocacy began. It wasn't with the United Nations, who, without the intervention of any African or African voice or African state to say, look, our artifacts need to return to Africa. Our heroes, right? The body parts of our heroes needs to be in the African soil, and not behind Western glasses for entertainment. And in addition to that, all of those fees that are charged for those Western museums should return to Africa. Do you know how much they charge to go and see African human body parts and African artifacts?
So, obviously,
just answer me this, right? Just answer me this. How would Europe feel? Would Europe accept the Mona Lisa in Lagos? If Lagos was to steal the Mona Lisa and have it displayed in Lagos, in Accra, in Johannesburg, in Monrovia, how would Europe feel about that?
I guess that scenario would actually require colonization of France. That's what it would require. Because you need to create. That's the point. These artifacts were stolen, and I agree with the word stolen. They were stolen under a regime of colonization, right?
That is still happening via the UN.
Again, I'm not sure the UN is facilitating the taking of artifacts from Africa to Europe. I am not sure the UN is doing that.
Bring it back, right? Because to be fair, and there are real abuses, right, happening in Africa, like everywhere, in every part of the world. As Milen said, this is real, right? It happens. And so I think this is a bigger question about. This raises a bigger question about what does accountability, right, looks like for Africans? Because so far, it looks like our only method of accountability and monitoring is through international organizations, right? And I think that is the central problem here is as we think about the future and a continent that wants to assert its sovereignty, why
did some people get out of the ECOWAS?
Accountability?
Why did some people get out of the ECOWAS?
That's what the AES did, right? And why?
Yeah, why did they? Why?
Of the West. It doesn't serve the agenda of Africa.
Why did they get out of the ECOWAS?
I just told you the ECOWAS serves the agenda of the West and not African states. Because if an African state is trying to develop its nation, the ECOWAS as an economic body should enable that, right? Should empower that, should support that. Instead, what did it do? They sanctioned their own African brothers, right? Understanding. Nigeria sanctioned Niger, Burkina Faso, and cut off their electricity while their medical facilities had patients that were connected to medical devices. So you rather kill your own brothers and sisters to appease the West. Tell me that the ECOWAS was established for the African benefit. Tell me that the AU was established for the African benefit. They're being funded by the West. And until Africa can understand that Africa problems cannot be solved by Western funding, it has to be solved by Africa funding and the resources that are under our soil, we're going to find ourselves in this problem. And we find ourselves in this problem because of bad leadership, that we need them to really vacate so we can take over as the next generation of leaders, because they're not serious and they're cowards. This cowardice cannot continue.
You'd be willing to relocate to Liberia?
Sorry?
You'd be willing to relocate to Liberia?
Of course. I go to Liberia like at least 3 times a year. Are you kidding?
There you go.
You'd be willing to relocate, not to visit?
Of course. 1,000%. Look, I wasn't brought here because I came for economic migration. I was maybe 2 when the Civil War came upon us. I was uprooted from a middle-class family. My grandfather, look, I have lineage up to King Salboso Kamara, the first king of that region, the first king of the Green Coast. I have royalty in my blood. Do you think I want to come here and do a 9 to 5? Are you kidding me? No, I was not brought here to come and seek economic benefits. I already had that. Had once again, had the West not brought upon us a regime change, a coup.
Yes.
I would not be here. Most Africans in the diaspora today would not be here. So let's be very matter of fact. I'm not here on my own will. I'm here because I was forced to be here. I don't want to be here. Take your passports, do whatever you want to do. My continent is Africa. My country is Liberia. And I fight for Africans and every single one of us to one day be able to return home and truly join hands, roll up our sleeves, and build the Africa that we all truly can be proud of. And we are not going to do it by external forces. We're going to do it by Africans joining hands, one country at a time.
Yeah, and what I will say is, as long as the West is invested in anything that Africa has, I hate to tell you, you have to do it predicated on them. You have to, a majority, and that's in any business structure. If I'm the primary investor on this podcast, hey, Sandra, we don't want that discussion. These discussions taper off. And I'm bringing it from the social commentary aspect, right? Because I feel the passion in both of you guys, but I do realize is as long as the West is invested in anything, United Nations, the ECOWAS, like for them to sanction and go against, I'm sorry. I can't look at another African country and be like, I'm going to shut off your electricity. Well, why? Because you have a quiet investor who feels a way about one of the dude on your board because he's a little too ambitious.
Yeah.
I guess I agree with you guys.
How do you respond to what Fanta said?
I agree with you guys on the matter of African agency. I do believe that the solutions lie on the continent and not outside of the continent. What I do not accept is this idea that we need to sort of retrench. We need to go back into our shells and that everything that we are looking for is on that continent. No, it is not true. Or that how do Africans actually express their autonomy and their sovereignty in this day and age? Africans will express their autonomy and sovereignty in different ways. The most important thing for us is to find ways where whatever we do, we can show resilience. In whatever we do, we can show durability of purpose. But this idea that we need to sort of throw the baby out with the bathwater, I'm not going to sign up for that, because
I think you said it very well, right, Nee? It's about strategic autonomy. It's about
it's about
deals, right?
Yes, it's about mutual. If it's about mutual benefit, then it requires the fact that you need to determine the dynamics or the relationship that should exist between yourselves and the other people. And the relationship that I feel you guys are advocating is one of hostility, and I do not believe we require that in order.
Correct. What I'm advocating is we are going to a table as a group of partners. We know what we bring to the table. I think the genesis.
What exactly does Africa bring to the table? I'm not saying we do not bring anything. Again, you see, no.
You want to take this violent, or you want me to?
Listen,
The
rubber.
point still remains.
Rubber is a resource. Timber is a resource.
Anything that you,
anything
anything.
that you're saying,
Guys,
what does
one at a
Africa bring to
time,
the
one at a
table?
time, so we can hear you. We can hear
I'm a
you.
little disappointed that
Milen,
you're saying.
finish. Yeah.
I'm disappointed that you're saying, what does Africa bring to the table? Because this is a country who basically has other countries invested there because they cannot get those things from their country. Like, it doesn't happen in their country. So when I think what Fanta had brought up at the beginning is us building amongst ourselves. So when we go to these tables and we sit, we're not coming from a place of being scared. We're coming in a position.
So why exactly that? I mean, having said what you said, why exactly do you poo-poo the idea that African integration is what would solve a lot of these things? Because Fanta in one breath says, you need to be nationalistic, stand up for your country, and then the next thing she says, but you need to trade among yourselves and come together. What is it? Which one comes first?
I don't understand.
Is it the nationalism? Is it no? Which one comes first? Is it the nationalism? Is it the nationalism or the integration?
You're using those words. I don't subscribe to those words.
Okay, what comes first? What comes first?
You have to you're borderlining propaganda. You're using those Western terminology, and let's stay away from that.
What comes first? But what comes first?
Look. Let me clarify. Right? Let me clarify for you. The same thing, and we had this discussion last week where you kept saying, look, the only way that Africa progresses, right, is Africa being united. And I said, what about the AU? And you said, the AU has this thing of superiority going on and what have you. I'm like, what have you? Look, and I said, Africa unity, South and South unity is very important, right? It's only going to further progress the agendas of all of the countries within the global South. Now, we should not wait for that moment to happen for progress to be initiated. We should continue individually working on those things, right, that can further our economies and create better living conditions for our people while working towards that unified front, whenever it happens. In that interim, while developing ourselves, leveraging our resources, you ask what Africa brings to the table. Are you kidding me? Africa powers the entire world. Your very cell phone that you're using.
No, I am not sure that is true.
Right? So let's not.
I am not sure that is true.
Let's not go there, Nee, because
that is not true.
10 hours. We can do 10 hours of what Africa brings to the table. Let me summarize by saying this, because it's very important. Africa united, across the world, not just on the continent, across the world, is very important. It's going to be very, very powerful. In the interim, focus on what you can do to move your country and your economies forward in the various sectors: militarily, infrastructure, health, education, agriculture, what have you, right? Number two, we can also leverage not just intercontinental trading, but also intra-continental trading with Caribbean nations. Right? There's so much that we can do that to trade with them.
How much do you think that
power the socioeconomic status of the African people, both on the continent and in the diaspora and in the Caribbeans as well? What you're saying is that we should focus on Western partnerships, and that's how Africa moves forward. I'm saying we can establish strategic relationships where it is mutually beneficial. I'm not saying let's sit here and act like we don't need friends. Africa trades with China. Africa trades with many other nations. We need to we need to take a look at those relationships that do not benefit us and restructure them to where they're mutually beneficial, where we're not being exploited or we're not subjecting ourselves to exploitation. That's what I'm saying, Nee.
Do you disagree with that? Do you disagree with that? And really quickly, because we have to wrap up. I know we can go on and on and on.
Yeah. I guess the problem I have is that I probably just keep falling victim to thinking about things in terms of policy and gradualism. I don't want to oversimplify things and go like, oh, if we are actually very, very, very proud of Africa, everything will be solved. And that is I do not want to fall victim to that temptation.
That's what Fanta is saying. I don't think she's just speaking as a
No,
matter of
I think
she's saying our leaders, we need to learn how to leverage what we
African
have.
leaders, African leadership is something to cry about for Africans. I do agree on that. But I have not been told, or at least she's not expressed to me, what she means by basically having relationships that are mutually beneficial. You are in a world where countries,
right? The relationship, the deal, Liberia's Firestone deal, where Liberia, that deal. What I mean, let me clarify that point. What I mean by mutually beneficial. That deal was probably struck decades ago. That deal said essentially, I think it's 1 cent or is like 5 cents, is below 10 cents, right, per hectare. Which is why Firestone, the largest tire company in the world at the time, right, for so many years, I think up to recently they just fell to number 2, had their plantation in Liberia. That deal was not mutually beneficial. That deal was exploitative. What I mean by mutually beneficial is Liberia taking a look at that deal with Firestone and saying, look, this 10 cents, this 5 cents per hectare, it's not fair. Come on, Firestone, right? Let's structure that to maybe like 50 cents, maybe $1. That's what I mean by that, Nee. That's what I mean.
The relationship I'd rather have with the West is one where African countries realizing their comparative advantage. And when I said, what does Africa bring to the table, I was actually trying to understand where you think Africa has comparative advantage. There's been a lot of, and maybe that is good, there's been a lot of Pan-African swirl on the continent in the last 5 years. You know, we are taking our countries back, we are kicking out these colonizers, and there's been a lot of that, and maybe that's good. Anything to make you feel good about Africa, I'm there for it.
Isn't Trump doing the same thing like right now, kicking out like
I am saying
other countries because
but then my understanding of African
as well. So what is
my understanding
African thing? I mean,
come on. Wait. My understanding of African identity is not as narrow and as close-minded as some in the West, try to look at themselves.
That is what you're comparing it
my
to,
understanding
right?
of no.
Africa needs Western influence and Western partners. When America's very policy on immigration is America first. Where's the Africa first, Nee? Where's the Africa?
I don't need an African first.
Then it means so it means that we're nationalistic when we say Africa first, but America can say America first, and that's okay. Nee, I'm not understanding your point.
Many countries say themselves first. And I mean, Nee, and I hear you, man. You're saying, look, let's establish these partnerships. You don't need to beat your chest to establish these partnerships. That's fine. But the partnerships cannot be a subservient approach. They need to be 50-50. And you are not going to get 50-50 across board. And that is why I do not want to submit to the oversimplification that Fanta does.
They need to be 50-50 on certain extent.
I do it because people like you need academic people like you overcomplicate it, and Africa needs practical solutions.
Because it is complicated. Guess what?
Linguistics. We need practical solutions, and we have shown that we can deliver that. Ibrahim is doing that, and so many other leaders are doing that. That's what we need.
It's bare bones.
That's what we need.
Figured it out, and I agree with you saying, Nee. I agree with you on certain. I agree with you on certain takes, but certain things I do think you are probably like overstating it. When I say the 50-50, I think there's going to be certain meetings where it is a 50-50. There's going to be certain meetings where it's going to be a 70-30. But if you're negotiating from a space of respect, that's a different thing versus where the moment you show up to a meeting and you're talking at versus talking to, two totally different meetings.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am.
That's going to be very important because these are, regardless of how we may disagree with how most of our leaders are, they are dignitaries. They still are dignitaries. They still come to these countries with security details. They still come to all of these things. But the moment, it's like, look at what happened with our president and Trump. Oh, you speak really good. Listen, I fell over. And then he was like, yes, sir. Yes, sir. What? Yes, sir. You are 9 years older than this guy. Yes, sir. What are you talking about? And this is where we come from. You are the alpha omega position in your country. All of those guys, they are his peers. But because he's from the West, it's a step down on the view of their position. And that's what I mean with the 50-50. I'm not expecting it to be 50-50 in every dealing, but one day we got to be the 70, America's the 30. One day America's the 70, we're the 30, the 40, the 60. And I think that is achievable, Nee. That's where I come from.
Leverage. Look, if you're bringing $100 billion, right, to fund a project that I'm not bringing $0, like I'm bringing $0 to the table, right?
Yeah.
You, America, you're bringing $100 billion, right? We're going to look at that. We're going to look at the value of what I bring, the value of what you bring, and ensure that that arrangement is structured to where, look, it's going to be very naive of us to think that investors come not to make profit. Investors come to make profit.
Right.
So when we sit across the table from them, we have to understand that, right? And we have to negotiate very fairly. We also cannot negotiate from a point where you look at the value that you're bringing and it doesn't amount to 100 billion, yet you're asking for like 50-50. No, let's truly assess. What we're saying is truly assess and understand what your value is first and foremost. So you're empowered to have that negotiation. When you sit at the table, you will have the understanding that, look, this person is here for a profit, but let's make sure that I also benefit, my people benefit as well. And not where they come in and while you don't understand your value in the first place, because something that was just very, very, like just blew my mind. Back to that meeting that you referenced, Milen, the African leaders, like we're saying it, is essentially saying, we have resources, right? Come take our resources. Come assess our resources. How the heck in 2025, where there are geological tools, that geological technology have advanced in this age, you're going to ask another country to come and do a survey of your minerals? You have not invested in the proper equipment to survey what you have under your soil, yet you want to drive private jets. Yet you want to drive hundreds of $1,000s worth of cars. But you have not invested in geological tools to understand what is under your soil. That's what I mean, Neil. So I'm not oversimplifying. I'm speaking in simple terms so that the everyday people can understand. Because people like you, and I'm sorry, Neil, sorry to categorize, right? But let me just remove you from it. Often, analysts come to the table with these overly charged, right, cliche terminology to confuse the people because they're driving an agenda. When the people don't understand, they don't feel empowered, they don't know where to start to act. We need practical solutions, and we have proven that we can achieve that. We can achieve that. You have a continent of 80% youth. Create agro-processing plants. Do not continue to export your raw materials. Ivory Coast today is responsible for 70% of the world's cocoa. Yet Ivory Coast does not have any cocoa processing plant. Maybe until recently.
Ivory Coast and Ghana
makes sense
actually.
when you buy chocolate.
Wow.
Do you know how many youth you could empower by establishing those agri-processing plants? We buy cassava today. Go to Whole Foods. Cassava flour, you will pay like $21, $25, $28, $32 for like 8 ounce. Cassava comes from Africa. We grow our own cassava. Why do we not have cassava processing plants? Why is that, Nee? We produce rubber, right? The raw rubber gets exported. Why do we not have rubber and tire processing plants across Africa? Why do we not? It will employ millions of youth. Do you understand that? This is what we mean by Africa has a lot of power where it can leverage, right, to have these negotiations and ensures that they are mutually beneficial.
My goodness.
Nee, do you disagree? Come on.
Again, I'm probably suffering from the fact that I actually like to do policy analysis, and I'm suffering from that because to compress things in different sort of spheres on different levels into just an hour's conversation, and one that is also very educative will be very difficult. Especially because, again, a lot of these conversations happen within the context of African nationalism. We can do everything. He-man, we don't want to stand in our way, and that sort of swashbuckling courage is all well and good until you actually have to look at the granular details, and then maybe at that point you understand why policy analysts and book long people tend to be, even those who are very sympathetic towards Africa. In fact, in our first conversation, I told you that I'm a critic of capital, and if we had time to talk about the AES Bank, I would actually I would have introduced my feelings on why I think it's a good idea. The only problem I have is that they are also constituting it in the same way that other people in the other parts of the world constitute their capitalism. So interestingly, we call what is happening in the Sahel states a revolution, and then they are still doing capitalism. They're still doing capitalism like Westerners, and But again, these are conversations that need to be had. But then I guess for some of us, it's very, very difficult to submit to the temptation of oversimplification. I guess that's the main problem.
Yeah, well,
I don't want to oversimplify. I really do not want to oversimplify what the challenges are and what the prospects are.
What I would say is this, right? These conversations are critical, especially given the times that we're in right now, right? And what is happening, the shift. I keep talking about the shift that's happening because we're in it. We're experiencing it, right? And I think this time also calls for us to revisit history, because for me, as I'm hearing all of you, speak, and what you're saying is so important, so informative, right? I'm playing Kwame Nkrumah, right? And I've been reading many of his books lately, Africa Must Unite, and what his vision for the continent, what it's going to take for us to be free. And what we're saying, what Fanta is saying, what Milen is saying, it's not impossible. It's really not, because even if you look at what Kwame Nkrumah did in a very short period, and you're Ghanaian, so I don't need to, I don't need to talk to you about Kwame Nkrumah and the impact that he made, in Ghana. When you look at what he did, the industries that he built in Ghana in a very, very short time, it just tells you that it's not impossible for us to build our own industries and for us to.
With whose money? With whose money?
Me. Okay.
The Kosovo Dam was built with American money.
But
what did the American take for
Kwame Nkrumah.
What did America take for it? They took Ghanaian gold. They took Ghanaian gold for it. What was the value?
Not exactly. No, not exactly.
Yes, it did.
Not exactly.
But I think I don't even want us to go in this rabbit hole, because to Milen's point, right? We're not saying no to partnership. We're not saying no to investment. We're saying yes to win-win partnership.
Yes.
So if we're getting capital to build our infrastructure, to build our gold refinery, so we can because we that's the reality, is Africa needs funding, it needs capital. But how are we negotiating these deals? And I think that's fundamentally, the
you are negotiating these deals as individual states, and that is the problem. As individual states, you bring up Nkrumah. Nkrumah's number one sort of campaign was that the Organization of Independent African States can constitute a bargaining group that can force the hand of either the USSR or the Americans. And that's what I'm saying, that I do not want to fall into the nationalist, our leaders must be nationalist. I do not want to fall into that.
Where the conversation
I don't want to fall into that.
I think that's where the conversation starts, right? For me, I think that's where it begins. And you all have brought up a lot of really great points. Unfortunately, we're out of time, but I think next week we need to pick up with a conversation around what relationship we want with the West. Right. I think that's a very important conversation to be had now. What relationship does Africa today need or should have with the West. And where does that relationship start? Because things are crumbling. Everything is crumbling right now. And we have an opportunity to build a new type of partnership and relationship. But I think we need to decide what that looks like. So we can start our conversation. There's a lot of other great points that, you guys have made. I've been writing notes. But I think these are exactly the type of conversations that we need to be having. So I'm trying to 30 more seconds. Any final words? You have something pressing you want to say to close us out?
Yeah, I'm just going to say that Africa today, so if we look at fuel, right, let's just say like 3 items, fuel, pharmaceutical, and I think I was writing it down, machinery, right? We spent upwards 140 billion, the continent, externally. We buy from the Netherlands, we buy from France, we buy from UK, we buy from Spain, we buy from Germany. Those 3 items totaling 140 billion. Imagine restructuring those deals for identifying strategic alternatives within Africa and with the Caribbean. You're going to get those same things from Nigeria, from Angola, from Trinidad, from South Africa, from Egypt, from Cuba, and from Jamaica. This is what I mean when I say that we are empowered. Our dollars can be stretched much longer. When we trade amongst each other, when we operate from a place of power, when we understand what our values are, when we understand what enough to forecast and position ourselves to negotiate from, leveraging that strategic autonomy that Nee spoke about, right? It will put Africa in a better place to achieve progress in a much, much, much faster state. We don't need overly exaggerated solutions. We need practical solutions. And we have proven that we can achieve that. So the time is now and not tomorrow.
Yeah, Milen and Nee, final words really quickly.
So I do believe Africa can, and I think Africa will. Unfortunately, it may not be in our lifetime. But the current mindset that we have has to be totally eradicated because most African countries do come from the subservient approach. And what I feel is resources are the most important things, and resources it's not money. Resources are the physical goods that leave a place, right? And I feel with Africa being the host of that, it puts us at a very competitive state. So I believe that this will happen, and I hope we see it. But this is my long-term belief, because for someone like me, it's easy to be disconnected from Africa because of all of the fear-mongering and some of the stuff that I'm hearing. It's like, oh, it's easy to stay away because of this, that, and the third. But the truth of the matter is, where you're from is where you are from. And if it has all of these for you, why can't you be a part of it?
Nee?
All right. Finally, I'm actually reading a very interesting paper by two scholars trying to trace what is meant by the African middle class. And interestingly, what they are saying has a lot to do with the conversation we are having. The African middle class is a class of people who are outward looking, in that their tastes, their aspirations, their problem solving, their philosophies of life have all been shaped by things that they watch in the West, things that they watch in Europe and in the United States. And that is a very critical class of people. That's about, I don't know, maybe a quarter of Africans who can afford more than, I don't know, maybe $30 a day. Now, this class of people have curated, again, their identities on Western demands and Western conditions. Now, all of these things about Africa must do this, Africa must do that, yet you have people whose entire view of development is no different from anyone who has gone to business school in Chicago or Wharton, or President Trump went to Wharton, or Yale. Again, why do I bring this up? I am saying that the basis of African reconstruction, or the basis of African rebirth, starts with actually challenging the conditions of our subservience. And the conditions of our subservience is Western capital. And that is what, and Western capital actually requires that. Western capital is okay if you want to be nationalistic and, stand up for your sovereignty and, you want to be very Ghanaian and very Nigerian. Yeah, okay with it. After all, the concept of Ghana arose out of, Gold Coast, which was a colonial extraction point. And so I think we need to confront at least even the basis of knowledge. Why even the sort of solutions we prefer in conversations like this, we need to take second and third looks at it. That's all.
Yeah. Well,
I recommend one book is called The Confessions of an Economic Hitman. If you read that book, Nee, you're gonna understand where we're coming from, because the deals that are made by the West are not for Africa. They're exploitative. And Confession of an Economic Hitman was someone who actually worked for the World Bank and the IMF.
Well, I think at the end of the day, we're all agreeing on the same thing. That's what I got from this whole thing. That at the end, in your final statements, we're all saying the same thing. Because, Nee, you're saying the basis of a subservience is Western capital, right? And it's no different from what Fanta and Milen have been saying. So next week, we'll pick up from there. We'll talk about what Ibrahim Traoré and the AES is doing, building their own bank. We'll talk about how we can leverage or build diaspora. How do we mobilize diaspora capital, right, to help to support Africa's development? And then we'll go into what relationship Africa today needs to have or should have with the West. So you've given us a lot to think about this week. Thank you so much for always bringing so much fire and critical thinking and analysis to these conversations. You guys are incredible. So until we meet, take care. All right.
Take care.
Hey, you. Thanks so much for watching this episode. I hope you enjoyed it. And if you did, don't forget to subscribe and join the family. Also, visit face2faceafrica.com for your daily news and updates on what's going on within the global Black community so you can stay informed.